I'm going to review latest information, and I'm going to use 4, perhaps even 5 headings, but we'll see, because I've got a dilemma I want to share with you on where we are now and where we are headed. Some of you will remember that in previous briefings, I described how we are seeing an incredible acceleration in numbers of reported cases of COVID around the world. 4 million cases in the last month out of a total of around 9 million cases overall. It's an incredible acceleration. And despite the fact that numbers of cases have been coming down in Western Europe and in some other regions, the real acceleration is occurring in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, beginning now in Africa, and it really is fast. And I think the challenge that I'm seeing in just about every center where decisions are being made is, what can the world do to reduce the incredible burden of this pandemic, which is now advancing in so many different countries? Is the mortality rate as high in developing nations as it has been in Western Europe and the US? Answer, it's certainly high. It's just that the age structure of populations in developing regions tends to be different. So I'm firstly going to say this is not a different disease in developing nations. It's the same disease causing the same spectrum of illness, and it needs to be taken really seriously. I was asked just 2 days ago by a senior leader in the World Health Organization, when did I think it was going to calm down? When did I think it was going to end? And I said, as I've said on these briefings before, the virus is with us for the foreseeable future. And although we get some early promising results from reports of testing of vaccines, it will be 2.5 years before there's a vaccine available and administered to everybody. And that is if everything goes well. So I am continuing to make the point that every society everywhere needs to be able to learn to live with this virus as a threat. And so that brings me to my headings for today's briefing. First, they're all beginning with C in English. The host heading is calculated. I actually believe that one of the most important requirements in all responses at this time is being able to make an assessment of risk in different settings, and then to calculate actions to be recommended in relation to that risk. If there's not much virus around, then it's reasonable for people to go about their lives pretty much as normal, because you can calculate that the risk is very low of infection. At the same time, if you've got data on the situation in particular groups, like those working in residential care or those working in food factories or other places where we know the risk can be higher, then again, you can calculate whether or not there have got to be changes in relation to the needs of specific populations. I am very keen that we continue to describe the importance of risk assessment and to actually incorporate risk thinking into all decision making, because unless we do that, we cannot actually discuss with each other or discuss with authorities what should happen in particular settings. Now, that does mean that it's necessary for information about the virus to be available and to be disseminated for use at local level. And I'm hearing quite a lot of concern that people just don't have information about where the virus is, and that makes it super hard for them to take calculated risks. Secondly, picking up on what WHO leaders have been saying in the last few days, I'm very much focusing on the importance of comprehensive responses. A second word beginning with C, comprehensive. You see, Just recently, there was discussion in the UK about whether or not to reduce the physical distancing guidelines from 2 meters to 1 meter, dealing with a single activity and trying to pick that out and say, well, it's important to be 2 meters and not 1 meter, or some other variation on it, is not in itself useful, because the issue that has to be understood is that it's a spectrum of activities, and it's got to be a comprehensive spectrum of activities that are necessary to try to get risk down and then to try to manage that risk. And so what our WHO friends keep saying is it's about a mindset that makes sense of the reality of the existence of this virus, and then using that mindset and applying it to the range of behaviors that individuals take, that authorities take, and so on. And that to try to boil things down into choices about a single activity or a single variable is not helpful. So I'm going to keep trying to find ways to stress the importance of a comprehensive approach to dealing with the threats of COVID and to responding to COVID. The third word that I'm wanting to bring more to the fore, and one that I think has to be brought more into decision-making, is something about our own feelings as we're managing COVID. You know, it's not just another threat coming to affect society alongside the many threats that we're already dealing with, like loss of nature or climate change or problems with employment. The challenge about COVID is that it's actually now becoming a condition that is affecting poorer people, people who've got fewer assets, people who have less power. And it's only possible to address an issue like this if there is quite a high measure of compassion being shown for those who are most at risk. Now, that compassion, of course, can take various forms: kindness in the face of people's needs, or a generosity in the face of people needing support because they don't have the resources. I personally think that global compassion is necessary now. In my conversation with the head of the International Rescue Committee yesterday evening, David Miliband, I was hearing from him real anxiety that he has in his organization, that non-governmental organizations at local level just don't have the resources to be able to respond to the needs of the people who are poor, and particularly to the needs of women who are really suffering most as a result of some of the COVID impacts around the world. And that can only be dealt with through compassion, because it requires the transfer of resources from those who have wealth to those who don't, governments who have wealth to those who don't, leaders who have wealth to those who don't, philanthropists, of course, and the like. But it also applies to every single one of us. Unless there is compassion built into our response, we're actually not going to be able to get on top of this virus. Increasingly, talking to colleagues around the world, they are reminding me that because this is becoming a challenge for poor people in poor countries, actually getting on top of the virus is only going to be possible if we will listen to and respond to the needs and challenges of poor people. Compassion is key. And then my fourth word for focus, being my own mind, and one that's really etched deep into my thinking right now, is getting the message right and making sure that people have an opportunity to hear that message clearly. And it's about communication. Here are 4 reasons why I think that's necessary. Number one, in many European countries right now, as the lockdowns are being released, there is a sense among the population that basically it's all over and they can play and they can have fun. And that recognition that the virus is still here is not widely recognized. I have to use every single opportunity available to me to communicate the message: the virus is still here, the virus is dangerous. And that's what I'm doing. But I think we all need to do that. And we need to do it in a very clear and unambiguous way. Secondly, on communication, we have to keep stressing that poor countries in our world are particularly in danger. And for them, there are often very limited options for dealing with the virus, especially if they've got poorly funded health services. And so we've got all sorts of data coming into WHO telling us that there are shortages of reagents for testing, there are shortages of PPE still, that's protective equipment, there's shortages of oxygen for treating people who've got the virus. The communications issue, just simply to inform people what's going on, is absolutely key. Thirdly, on communications, it's necessary to be clear that the COVID impact and the need for COVID readiness will go on for the foreseeable future, and to not allow any thinking that vaccines are going to come along suddenly and help us out of this. So communicating the time horizon is key. And then fourthly, communicating between each other in a very open way on things that we're finding that are surprising us, or things that we need to take into account. Got to get effective local action. That can only be done through communication at the local level. So I'm really very focused on communication and wanting to actually highlight that in my own interactions with medical students, with business leaders, with people working in civil society, with governments. Just get that communication right, make sure it's consistent, make sure it's clear, but get it right all the time. And then my final C in today is one that I don't normally use, and I was debating whether to share it with you, but I'm deciding now that I do want to speak out about it. It's competence. Competence. Competence of leadership, competence of public health decision-making, competence of action in different situations where people are making decisions. Are they based on an assessment of risk? Are they based on a true understanding of the willingness of people to be able to work with new information? You know, is there respect given to all who need to be involved in the decision-making process? I hate to say it, but I am now seeing evidence of a number of governments where there is just constant incompetence when it comes to dealing with the situation of this virus. And I think it's necessary to at least point out the significance of competence without necessarily identifying individuals who are displaying what I perceive to be incompetence. But the core reason for saying this is that there is no justification at all for a leader, be they a national leader or a local leader, presenting COVID as a minimalist threat that is not actually causing major dangers to large sections of the population. There is no justification at all for leaders who choose to deliberately create some kind of competition and dissent among the different services that are working for their people. There's no justification for leaders denying the reality that in the meat sector, the fish sector, in the criminal justice sector, and a number of other locations, there are just really heightened risk. You know, if we do not explain to people that this virus is a continued threat, then I believe that represents a lack of competence. And we are seeing this without necessarily going into too much detail in at least 2 Latin American countries where the levels of virus is really rising, and there are leaders who are just refusing to take it seriously, refusing to wear face protection even though they're advised to do so, and so on. And we've also got a number of other countries in other parts of the world, including at least 3 in Africa, where the same very strange and I believe incompetent leadership pattern is being shown. So in summary, we have to be calculated in dealing with this challenge because it is about risk, and to assess risk, there's a need for information. That information has to be locally specific, and in order to be able, therefore, to make judgments, some degree of intellectual work is necessary, which will eventually become instinctive about determining what is the kind of risk people should or should not be prepared to take. Number 2, we have to approach this virus in a way that is comprehensive, because there's no single activity that will reduce risk. There's no single activity that will enable societies to get on top of it. Number three, we must recognize that there are certain groups that are worse affected than others, and they're the people with the least resources to deal with it. So a form of compassion that actually is associated with kindness and generosity is key to the world being able to get on top of it. And without compassion, this world is going to be humbled by this virus in a way that I believe we have no possible way of conceiving. Governments will fall because of insecurity, food shortages and hunger will rise, and there will be a great deal of widespread suffering. Without compassion, we will not be able to hold our world together in a way that comes through this virus strongly. Fourth, communication is so essential, because unless there is the sharing of understanding, the opportunity for sense making and narratives emerging, not just in the heads of individuals, but in the collective consciousness of society, this will make life extremely difficult. And fifth, there is a case for identifying and referring to competence, and if necessary, calling out incompetence, especially when that is clearly, when the incompetence is flying in the face of the science and leading to large numbers of people dying, large numbers of people getting long-term illness, or large numbers of people suffering from economic damage and social disruption. Competence matters in responding to COVID-19. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'd just like to start by thanking Jack Brougham. Now, Jack, I hope I pronounced your name right. It could be Brougham or Brougham, but I'm going to say Brougham. Give us your name, Jack. What's your name?
It's Broom, but it's spelled in such a ridiculous way. Pronounce it however you like. Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
So here's Jack in his words. He's an illustrator, but he's also a cartoonist. And he likes to use cartoons together with narrative and humor to represent ideas in ways that are fun, compelling, and clear. Well, we're into C words today, and so Jack has already started that with his quick summary of how we initiated things, and I'm just very grateful to Jack for highlighting the acceleration and then to picking out the 5 C's that I was using to organize my thinking, and we will add some C's, I believe. I mean, that's one of the joys of a session like this. We will add some C's, Jack, so that there may be more coming in. So Jack Brougham, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to sharing the screen over time. Brilliant. The team is mostly the same people. We've got 1 or 2 changes because of people having to do different things. But I'd especially like to give a real shout out to Thuy Nguyen, who is our lead on communications and has been doing a lot with me over the last few days, preparing for another of the videos that we've been producing. It'll be our video 3. And I'd be really keen, Thuy, if over time, if there's any reflection you'd like to make during this session on the organizing themes, I'd be pleased to hear it. It was you who was saying to me yesterday that as far as you're concerned, unless we highlight compassion, we're in difficulty. John, who's been stressing the importance of communication, but also of local action, which is why I really brought the calculated one in and given it a special one. John is also very much involved with me in trying to encourage competent leadership. So, John, I'm putting you on notice to come in on a couple of these things. And we're going to have some more C words from different colleagues, and I welcome that. Catherine Deland, who's our health advisor, has been sharing with me her views on comprehensiveness. She and I, in our regular interactions with the WHO technical team, are constantly being reminded by Mike Ryan and others that it's not a case of picking up one or other intervention and getting very hung up about those and having lots of debates about them. It's got to be the whole collection of mindset shifts and action that's necessary. Saber Moumen, who's with us, who's come back after being ill and is connecting us with a lot of what's happening in North Africa and particularly in Tunisia and also into the local community here in Ferney-Voltaire in France. And Florence Lasbens, our managing director, who was sitting with me and who is connecting with all of you, and who, I think, in a gentle way, has been stressing to me that actually we do need to start focusing on competence, because we do see evidence of individuals who are really competent and doing really good jobs, often at local level. And also we see evidence of a lack of competence, which we need to really identify. And so one of the questions that's come in has been about competence. What is the type of leadership that's needed in order to be competent in the face of COVID? And I think that I might see whether anyone on the call would like to comment on this, because it would be, I think, very useful to initiate, if we can just get the gallery view up. Here we go. Thank you very much indeed. Just to see some different views on competence and what does represent good leadership and what represents less good leadership. I'll just start off and we'll see if anybody wants to come in. Perhaps they would just indicate on the chat. It's the easiest way of doing it. But here are three things that I want to pick up. Number one, absolutely putting people at the center of the response. You know, it's tempting often to talk about all this in terms of what the government does or what businesses do or what different organizations are taking on, and to very much focus on what our programs are all about. But in the end, I think that the best and most competent leaders put people at the center of the response and use local authorities and local organizations to empower people so that they can make calculated choices about their risk. Secondly, the leadership focuses on place, on the locality where the issues are being faced. And that's because the virus moves in a very locally specific way. Stopping outbreaks requires local action. Making people better empowered to make choices requires local engagement. And so being locally specific is key. The countries that seem to me to be doing the best are the ones that manage to maintain that local engagement. And number three, competent leadership does put public health really high up in the agenda. That doesn't mean that you increase necessarily spending on hospitals. It does mean that you put the health of a community at the highest level, because you need at all times to have information about that community level health. Now, this is leadership that recognizes that everybody needs to be involved in responses. It builds a collective approach. And so instead of having a leader who is perceiving that she or he needs to be showing the state of being in charge in a very decisive way, the leader is somebody who basically gets everybody else to work effectively together, what we sometimes call living systems leadership. And we now have got a selection of examples of people all over the world who are doing this. They're often remarkably modest. They don't stand up and normally be shouting out at the top of their minds about their brilliance, but instead they are ensuring that others are able to perform. I'd just like to see, I want to see if I can get my gallery view back again. There you are, I've managed that. John Atkinson, would you agree with the way in which I've highlighted some of the features of the kind of leadership that's necessary? Would you like to add anything?
I absolutely agree, David. I think one of the issues that we've seen is that when the pandemic spirals out of control, it requires a very much an emergency response in order to get some semblance of control back, to stop health systems, particularly hospital systems, being overloaded. And therefore, what we've seen is national leadership take what it would describe as a strong grip, take emergency action, and tend to centralise everything that's gone on. And I think what we've seen also with that is then the difficulty in letting go of that, and then enabling local authorities to work effectively, because things have become so centralised. And I just wondered if you might expand perhaps on some of the stuff you'd seen from other outbreaks where you've had to cut through that. I wonder if you might add to something on that.
It's interesting, John, that there was always a kind of motto of what a good crisis response involved. And it said, you need to have a single point of command and control. And the idea was that you would have one person who would issue the instructions that everybody to follow, and that same person would control all the assets of the response. And that works quite well when you're dealing with an earthquake, or when you're dealing with a big fire, or when you've got a massive storm surge. And you do need to try to centralize both the assessment and then the response planning, and also the management of assets under your control. But when I was working in a number of operations where the military came in and supported relief work, once in particular in North Iraq in the 1990s, I saw a very interesting thing, that even though one imagined that the military would be the most obsessed about single command and control, I actually found that they were much more nuanced in their approach, and recognized that in a response, you're often dealing with multiple different actors, each of whom have their own way of working, and also people tend to have identity with these different groups. They might be different militarized groups or different relief groups, but to treat them all as one single shared asset actually runs the risk of provoking a great deal of agitation. And instead, I noticed that they actually believed in having some overarching unified strategy with agreed strategic principles, often negotiated with the leaders of the different groups that we were working with, but then very much devolving the responsibility for implementation to others. And so the leader was acting in a much more nuanced way. And I then saw the same approach adopted in the Ebola response. The more advanced our response, the more action was decentralized to the local counties or local districts or local prefectures. And there were individual incident managers made responsible for local action who were tuned in to the different groups they were working with, whether they were tribal leaders or religious leaders or political leaders, and it made a huge difference. And so I'm very much in favor of enabling local action through effective coordinating leadership from the top. I hope, John, we'll get a chance to share more of that over time. And so I go to Marianne Hasselgrave, who's, I think, gone one step further. And in a way, Marianne, I'd love it for you to share your thinking about this, because you're saying, unless you have competent leadership, you're going to miss another C factor, which is very important. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Okay. What I was thinking is that there's an issue of confidence. We can see it in here, and I would say now a lot of people don't have confidence in their government. Therefore, why should the populations listen to their governments when they feel they're being lied to, when their governments are saying things that are then seen to be totally incorrect? But it's other confidence as well. And you mentioned about David Miliband and civil society. Yeah. Well, this is going to be a real problem. Or a lot of civil society organisations are being told already that their budgets are going to be cut by because of that there's far less gross national product, gross domestic product, that everything is going down. So this I think underlines a lot of the things. I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I think there's a real problem that has to be dealt with. Thank you.
And perhaps we could hold on to this, Marianne's point, that without confidence, it's really difficult for people to be able to take action in a calculated way. There is a chance that they will either individually or collectively just decide to ignore what they are getting from their governments. We saw this over the weekend in France, traveling to Besançon and talking to people in the local community and hearing that there is a real sense of alienation among some sections of society from the authorities, which in turn means that public health guidance is actually willfully disregarded. So thank you about confidence. And I just also thank you for stressing that unless civil society is supported, then it gets really difficult for the compassion part to be exercised. And I really want to go on about that more and more, because I am worried that the civil society structures that are necessary to support and protect poor people in places which are being badly affected by the pandemic are just not strong enough. I'm smiling while I'm saying it, but I'm picking it up now from too many places. And
if I can just say one more thing about it, it's a question of where do you find the entry point?
Yeah.
The entry point for moving in to make the change that's necessary. And that is, I think, is going to be critical, but where is it? Thank you. I won't say anymore.
Well, but we, each of us, need to do all we can in our own areas of work to find entry points through which we can operate. One thing that I will not personally ever reach in my own working is the notion that there is nowhere to turn. I am constantly trying to connect with different people to find viable entry points, and I look forward to hearing more from you about ways of getting in. I would like to ask Jane Badham to give her take on this. Jane, who we've been seeing you on one or two of these calls. Jane, you're in South Africa, I think. So if you'd like to come in quickly, that would be great.
Yes, hello, David. Thank you very much for letting me chat to you. I've added as another C. I think coordinated is another, or coordination is a really important C, because I think we see where we have very divergent approaches by different ministries, where we have, certainly in South Africa, different ministers giving different messages. That is deeply, deeply problematic. And so we really need to make sure that coordination is strong, because it also then undermines the messaging when you have Ministry A saying something and then Ministry B saying something totally different, and that reduces the confidence of the people in the messaging. And we're seeing in South Africa now, as lockdown is being released, people are now saying, well, it's over. And yet if you look at our figures, yesterday alone, over our highest number of deaths in a 24-hour period. So it is really, really concerning. So I also just want to add my last bit, which is an aside, but I wrote that yesterday I facilitated the launch of the UNICEF WHO report on the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes in Asia. And sadly, the endless examples of the private sector using this time to exploit the fear of mothers to promote their products. We saw endless examples. So I also want to stress that we need really high level support and messaging around the importance of continued breastfeeding. The WHO, as you know, David, has issued statements saying breastfeeding is safe in COVID, both mothers with COVID and those without, with certain principles. But that message is being undermined the whole time by the private sector in the actions we're seeing, giving donations, making mothers fear being close to their babies at this time, promoting the social distancing messaging when this is one time that social distancing isn't needed. So it really has become a big concern to me on yesterday's webinar, and I will be hosting the one in Africa next week as well, and I'm afraid we're going to see the same. Thank you for letting me speak.
Please, could you, because I've also been through through Patty Rundle and her group, I've been alerted to some really sharp practice by companies and have used my contacts to draw attention to that. Please, if you've got just a single sheet or two that just gives instances, that's really important for us to follow up.
Absolutely, and there was a call to action launched last night. I'll also quickly find it and share it in the chat group. A call to action by a number of organizations, including WHO, UNICEF, Helen Keller International, and others, asking companies to absolutely now become code compliant. And as you know, David, the activists consider me in the pockets of the private sector, and the private sector consider me an activist. So I sleep beautifully at night because I think I'm in exactly the place I want to be. So I'm not saying this as an activist, but I'm saying it because we need to really put mothers and children at the forefront in this pandemic as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Like the way you describe yourself, Jane. Now I got a question come in from Twee. Twee, is a chance for you to comment and to make your point.
Thank you. So I'm particularly interested in right now in whether decision makers in the media industry are holding themselves accountable for people's actions, which we know are very heavily influenced by the headlines that they run. We already have a tsunami of misinformation on social media, and that news outlets, reputable news outlets, have a big role to play. So I'm interested in that, and I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but would love to hear your thoughts. Myself, I haven't seen much to date from media industry leaders.
Gosh, I think that's an interesting perspective because we depend hugely on media for everything, for enabling people to have access to information on which to take risks. And that's particularly challenging given that so much science is now being pushed out super fast without peer review, and that causes some anxiety. We'll come to science in a minute, but I'll ask Shamim to make a comment. But we also depend on media for emphasizing the comprehensiveness of actions and not trivializing it into 1 meter versus 2 meters or whatever else. We depend on media for actually describing the extraordinary depth of the differences in challenges faced by those who are rich and those who are poor, and media don't always help us with that. Of course, we depend on media to communicate. We depend on media to help identify what is competent. We depend on media for coordination. You're absolutely right, and I wonder what is the accountability. So on Monday next week, I'm participating in a WHO meeting, which is about information and also particularly about ways to minimize the release of incorrect information around the world. I would encourage those of you who are interested to find out more about it. Catherine, I keep forgetting what the name of the meeting is because it's a new word they've invented. Catherine?
It's infodemics.
Infodemic. Is it publicly accessible, Catherine, that meeting?
It sure is. I can put the link into the chat section.
Okay, that'd be great, because I think this is a serious effort by Tedros and team, and led by, in this case, Sylvie Briand, to actually address this issue. And I will be Tweed, taking the point you've raised in my contribution and talk about accountability, I think it is extremely important. And I don't really quite know how one might take that forward. I am just keen now to invite Shamin Talakdar to comment on two things really. One is about information and research and how we use research to provide a decent information on which to make choices, and also on how then competence involves also transparency and accountability. I'm going to invite Ian Norton, who's joined us from Australia, to make a number of comments on the issues. Ian, I don't know whether you joined at the beginning, but you did, good. So I'd love it, because Ian is somebody who's been working on these issues very much with different governments in Australia on dealing with challenges, and he's been right through the whole journey, including working on cruise ships and in factories and so on. And then I'd like to invite, in due course, Surya Kumar and Holly Wheeler, if we get time. We'll try and keep it short. So, Shamin, please, from Bangladesh.
Thank you, David. I think that the confidence may come up and competence of the leadership may come up on the basis of the information they have. In Bangladesh, like if you look at government announced at the beginning of the COVID came regarding the social distancing and lockdown, but people did not follow that lockdown. I think that there's a miscommunication of the information we have given to the people. We never did any survey or research that how people would understand the information given by the government. I think that there was a need of rapid, assessment, people perception, knowledge, and practice on the basis of the information. On the other hand, in Bangladesh, there was a lots of problem regarding the accountability and transparency. And you may aware that, in Bangladesh, health workers, especially doctors, senior doctors are dying every day. More than 54, professor level doctors already died. But we never did any survey or research or audit that why doctors are dying, having some sort of protection or PPE they are using. Maybe there is a need of in-depth analysis, understanding that why doctors are dying. So I think that information and research is important for ensuring the competence of the leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you're an extremely courageous public health doctor, and you're not scared of doing the kind of work that you're talking about. And I hope that you will start to collect together information, particularly on illness and death among all people working in healthcare, whether they are providing direct clinical care or supportive services, because I'm hearing from all over the world that there is a really serious heightened risk for health professionals. And because they're exposed to very large amounts of virus, they seem to be the ones that are experiencing very high mortality. I heard it in Nigeria, I've heard it in South Africa, and now, unfortunately, I've heard it in Bangladesh. So thank you for that. And
David, can I just share one point? We developed a proposal to conduct the research on the issues I shared with you. We are trying to get the funding from different sources in Bangladesh, but nobody is coming forward to provide the funding to do these things. Today, our team, this is not only from the eminence, we made a team all over the country, young public health professional. We decided to start this research by crowdsourcing appeal to the people. If they can come forward, we want to start. If they don't come forward, then we will do this research by our own money. So that decision come up. I think that the audience I got through this meeting, maybe people can come forward and help us to do research in Bangladesh.
thank you very much indeed. Could you make certain that information is on the chat, or if you don't, if anybody who is interested in being connected to Dr. Talakdar and his organisation, Eminence. It's not Shamim's own organisation, it's a cooperative of public health doctors in Bangladesh. Do please let us know, because it's really important. This kind of observational study is key. We had to do Ebola, and it's needed now. Thank you very much, Shamim. Ian Norton, you and I have worked together on a number of responses. You've led emergency medical teams all over the world during Ebola. What's your reaction to my description of some of the challenges?
Well, I really like the C approach, David. I mean, I've got a few more to add, but there's some really interesting things that have come up. I like John's point about the centralized versus decentralized coordination or leadership. But I'm reading the chat on the side, and Fauzia's point she brought up a little while ago about consistency. I think this is going to be key. So if there is central competent leadership, it's the application by the local level consistently. And so I'm seeing this really from an interesting point of view here in Australia, where we have a consistent message from the leadership centrally, our federal government, and yet each state and territory, there's 8 state and territories here in Australia, have interpreted it differently and have shut their borders, or frankly, not agreeing with the central approach that is, it's better now that Australia opens its borders and travels internally as one country, because that's going to be good for the economy and it's manageable. We have enough testing, we have enough tracing, we have enough treatment in place. So that's a bit of a struggle for us. Absolutely all for localization of coordination and leadership, but if it's interpreted in different ways at the different local authority level, it gets very confusing for the public, and it gets really confusing for businesses that have to operate in each of those different jurisdictions as well. And they're then coming to me and coming to you and others asking for advice on how to deal with the slightly different interpretation across borders. We were laughing a little about, clearly the 1.5 meters or 2 meters is due to gravity and droplet spread, and that's why the number was put in place. And yet, arbitrarily, one of the states has decreased that, and we're asking ourselves, why? Has gravity suddenly got stronger in that state? We just can't understand. Yeah. There's also, I really like the idea of the competence at leadership level, and it's going to bring, maybe I'll throw out another C. I'm not sure if Jack can put this in the cartoon, but I'm going to use the C of color. Color meaning traffic light systems, and I truly like 2 examples here. One, Elizabeth Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, has shown great leadership as always in many crises recently, and she did again for their response to COVID and their ongoing response. But she was very clear. There's a 4-step process. It's color-coded, and she was great at discussing and informing the public to say, these are our 4 steps. We will eventually get to step 4, which involves this. And if we work together strongly, we can move down to 3 and then to 2 and then open up completely in 1 again. And we're all in this together. So she really telegraphed that well, articulated it well, communicated well to the people, and they felt part of the conversation. And that was just a fantastic example of competent leadership. On the traffic light system, I'm really interested in what Tom Friedman's come out with in Resolve to Save Lives and his NGO over in the States. And this traffic light system he's suggesting, or Resolve is suggesting, is that almost like a daily weather forecast, if it's a localized threat assessment and it's a color coding, you can look at what the threat is in your local area. And a bit like getting your umbrella and wearing that for certain weather forecasts, you can have a COVID forecast for your local region or area and decide whether you're going to wear a mask or not, or other interventions, or not go out that day. And I really think that again empowers locally, but that color coding system, we use it, as you know very well, in West Africa and Ebola to try and look at how well we're progressing. And I think there's value here as well. So thanks for the opportunity to talk.
So it's really interesting. Sorry, it's always fun hearing you, Ian, and thank you also for referring to Fawzia, and I hope we'll have time to invite Fawzia to make a comment in a minute. I just thought, yes, you need localized action, and your traffic lights need to be locally relevant, but you're also making the point that that doesn't mean it can be indisciplined. It's got to be according to some overarching principles, people have got to understand the reason for differences between your states and territories. I had the same story from Germany. There is very decentralized administration in Germany, and it's proved to be quite difficult for the Chancellor to maintain consistency across the different local administrations as lockdown is being released. And so all very, very important points being made. We're going to have a few more C's coming in, but just Surya Kumar, I said that I'd bring you in, and I want to just quickly, if you could make your comment, that would be great. Surya, if you'd like to unmute yourself, that'd be cool. I can't see where you are. Question, does it work? Surya Kumar may have, yeah, there you are. Suraj, you are unmuted. Would you like to speak and see whether we can hear you? Okay, Suraj, I can't hear you, so try once more. Okay, it didn't work. Okay, if you can come in later, but Suraj was saying, India's got a shrinking GDP, is going to have lower tax revenues. How to convince political leadership to spend more on COVID-19 as in the face of a shrinking GDP. This is a huge challenge. I just want to be very clear. And Suraj, I'm so sorry we couldn't hear you, but if you do manage to be able to speak, try again, Suraj. Speak to us now.
Oh no, I make a meeting.
Okay, Suraj is on the phone. All right. Anyway, he's just saying we need a national COVID-19 response program funded by the World Bank with. So if somebody could possibly mute Suraj's line, if you can, great. I think he doesn't know that he's on. Right, let's go to Fawzia Rashid. You've added another C word, and in fact, we've referred to it already from others, but I'd love to hear from you in your perspective. Fawzia.
Thank you. And Shamim, apna microphone ko on ache. So it's Shamim.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my, I'm sure everyone has a consistency story and frustrations that they've had to deal with, flip-flopping advice and so on. In my world, as a chair of the board of BRAC, but also involved in day-to-day work with AKDN on health and planning, when CDC sort of did the face mask bit, without sort of a great body of evidence behind it, we were thrown into a tizzy with pressures to mass produce face masks without any direction of, and I did the research, I went into all of the data, and I was alarmed at how it was clear that cloth masks let everything through, basically. And I was also fearful of basic things in terms of public health. What advice we would give people to wash them, clean them, expectations for sick people to wear them, the whole practicality of around that info, guidance from CDC was alarming for me. So did a considerable amount of pushback, and I was so grateful that WHO held fast. And when it did produce some guidance, it caveated everything with information. And so I've been reliant on WHO to help me provide sense in terms of advice I give. And I think that has saved lives. And it's been very, very difficult, because you've seen what's happened with that issue in terms of the press and pop stars and everybody else. It's been, and we'll continue to have problems with hydrochloroquine and other things. So my plea is, WHO, please keep doing what you're doing. This is not a complaint. This is a request to say that we're noticing that WHO is holding fast to good science, and just to say, please keep it up, because it surely must be difficult. I did have a question because this is coming up in planning. We're doing second rounds of plans for countries and so on. And the issue of people who had COVID who are now better, and the sort of assumptions around immunity. I know as an immunologist, we won't know anything about this until perhaps next year sometime. New season, and see how people fare. Perhaps before, but certainly by next year sometime we'll have a body of evidence. But in the interim, I'd really like to know what WHO is counseling, because people are making a lot of assumptions of who can go back to work, who can put themselves at risk on the basis of who's previously been infected and come through. And otherwise, excellent presentation, David. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course, yeah. It's very, very lovely to be with you again. Working with the Aga Khan Development Network, and Fawzia said that she's chairing Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee board. So very sorry?
Board member, not chair. But
say that the WHO position on whether you have COVID confers immunity against further infection is still not, at least according to my latest information, they're just not able to say that there is immunity on a widespread basis. There's an acceptance that some will have a measure of immunity, but that the degree is just not clear. Ian, is that your receipt? You're closer to the clinical stuff than I am.
Yes, I mean, there's lots of evidence that there's something, but it's also the length of time as well. And so the jury's out still. There are some interesting forums on the clinical side with people sharing the fact that they're seeing people come back with what they think is recurrence. And there's the usual debate about whether it was a nascent and then redisplay of symptoms. But yeah, we don't know yet. That's the problem.
Thank you.
Let me just get 1 minute comments from people because we're running out of time. Holly Wheeler, would you like to make your comment, please? Holly.
Good morning, David, everybody. It's good to see you. I'm always inspired by my listenings to this. My thoughts were about, I guess, power, and that where the power lies in terms of the connection and influence that you can have is really important in knowing that. And what I'm seeing locally is where leadership works really well is when people know what the spaces are that they can really influence. So on a really local level, like on your street, people listen to the people that they know. And so the community stuff seems to work really well when the relationships are great, but also when they've got communication going on. So when you're talking about communication, I think that's not just between people that you know, but between the scales, the different levels. And so maybe another time, I'd really like to hear what your experience has been about how you support leaders to occupy the space that they can have the most impact in. Because I think what happens is that we get leaking into other spaces. So thank you.
Those of you who would like to delve into that some more, I'm proposing we'll ask John Atkinson, perhaps with Holly Wheeler, to develop some ideas on relationships to power in terms of space within which you can exercise power and also the scale of the power that can be exercised. Joe Nichols, please, 30 seconds. Just lovely to hear from you. You're in Nairobi.
Yes, I am, and I would love to be involved in that last conversation that you suggested as well. And I think as well as where people listen, I'm seeing that some of the leaders and people in power tend to retract into an arena that they feel most comfortable in, and sometimes try to protect people that perhaps they identify most with, rather than a much wider population. That to delve into that would require quite a vulnerability to really try and understand what it is that people find it difficult to do. And especially where there's huge divides between leaders and the population, that seems to be more difficult for people to figure out a suitable way to approach. So I think that's a very interesting thing to think about more.
John Atkinson, just a last word from you. Are you ready to help us work a little bit on the characteristics of leadership that's comfortable with vulnerability, as Joe suggested?
Yes, absolutely. And this idea that Holly brings in of understanding where you can use your power and how to work across different levels will be fascinating. Really delighted to get involved further with that.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Here's my quick take on what's happened today. We've had an extraordinarily rich discussion on characteristics of responding to COVID that can be best, and we've really focused on particular characteristics of competent leadership. We actually think that that needs quite careful dissection, because it's not simply standing up and giving orders and commanding and controlling. It's about establishing relationships and being conscious of power, and then using that power to create different arrays of collective working that put people at the center. It's not impossible, and we've seen it done. We're seeing it being done, but most importantly, we need it to be done more. And you're all showing through your comments that this is something on which you have points of view, and we will go more into that in subsequent meetings of this kind. We focused on the C's. We didn't take all your questions. Please continue writing, connecting through whatever means you want. Remember that this team is here to react to you and you to react to them. To Jack Brougham, we want to look at your image again, see what you've done with our words. Oh, look at that. And the great thing about the techniques that Jack is using is he's able to shift things around and move them, and what a lovely phenomenon. So we will make sure that Jack's assessment is available to everybody. It'll be shared, and Twee will work with Jack on that. To Karen Wiedenmeyer, thank you very much indeed for writing. Chris Langdon as well. Joseph Batak, so sorry I didn't call on you. Annie Feltham, all fabulous, and we continue to try to maintain the dialogue and discussion. To Chris, this has to be integrated into thinking the unthinkable. If anybody who was on, who's come onto these briefings for the first time, please don't hesitate to write to us, contact@4sd.info. If you've got ideas about others we could bring in, or ways in which we can make this discussion more widespread, it's so important. With that, to everybody's on, and particularly to colleagues in the team, but also to family, my brother William, my daughter Josephine, who I think is on, I think my daughter Polly is on, and other family members. There's Josie. Thank you for being here. Just great that we're all together. And to those of you who are up late at night or early in the morning, thank you so much for being with us. Very, very rich and important indeed. Bye-bye all. Bye.